Welcome to the Mississippi NEMT Driver and Attendant Training course, DOM and ESRD. We'll cover quite a bit throughout this course. We'll begin with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA Act, and civil rights. From there, we'll move on to sensitivity, code of conduct, and we'll conclude with a drug and alcohol policy. Now, this training for transportation providers and drivers ensures credentialing compliance. It also helps drivers and attendants to provide safe and courteous service. This is a contractual requirement that all drivers and attendants serving the Mississippi beneficiaries must go through and pass this course. Now, there is also a provision on this, and that is that this training is an annual course. So after you've completed your course today, you passed it, you passed the quiz, you've gained your certificate, you're done for the next year. We'll move on to ADA and civil rights. Civil rights protection is for over 50 million Americans. ADA is a civil rights law that was passed by Congress in 1990. Prior to that, inaccessible public transit created barriers for active, productive lives for over 43 million Americans. These individuals with disabilities were excluded from the workplace, schools, and participating members of their communities. The ADA gave these individuals with disabilities the same opportunities as others. Now, the ADA law does define a person with a disability. It includes individuals with physical or mental impairments that substantially limit one or more major life activity, individuals with a record of such impairment, or individuals regarded as having an impairment. It also addresses transportation provided by both private and public held entities. The ADA law does outline certain training requirements. It outlines the fact that all drivers and attendants must be trained on how to operate their vehicles and equipment safely. They must receive training on providing the required level of service and treating passengers with disabilities in a respectful and courteous way. The ADA also outlines certain service requirements that we all must meet. It includes the fact that we must announce stops upon request, permit service animals to accompany passengers, permit passengers to travel with life support or assistive type devices. This includes your portable oxygen. We must make appropriate use of accessibility-related equipment and provide adequate time for the beneficiary to board and disembark the vehicle. The ADA also outlines certain things that we cannot do. They include the fact that we cannot discriminate, we cannot deny service, we cannot require the use of designated priority seating, or impose special charges based on the individual's disability, gender, religion, national origin, race, English proficiency, or age. We cannot require or deny an escort, and we cannot refuse service solely because the passenger's disability results in behavior that may offend, annoy, or inconvenience. I want you to keep in mind, though, that it is not considered discrimination to refuse service if the individual is engaging in violent, seriously disruptive, or illegal conduct. Moving on to customer service standards, of course, at all times we want to make sure that we are providing a high-quality service. This is for all beneficiaries, regardless of their age, ability, or disability. We want to make sure that we're operating those vehicles and all of its equipment safely, and we're assisting and treating the beneficiaries in a respectful and courteous way. Now, communication is quite important. We want to make sure that we are always using professional language as we are communicating with the beneficiaries. We want to be as accurate and specific as possible. Now, think of this as we're dropping off the beneficiary at a large facility or perhaps a hospital, and there's multiple entrances and exits. Now, we're dropping the beneficiary off for their appointment, and we'll be back later on today to pick up that individual to take them back home. As you're dropping them off, go ahead, communicate, get that specifics on where exactly you'll pick that member up. Again, we're at a large facility or a hospital. There could be 5 entrances or more, or exits. Go ahead, decide at that time where exactly you'll pick them up. It will not only help the member or the beneficiary in the long run, but it will also help you, save you time as you go to pick up the beneficiary. Of course, we always want to put the emphasis on the beneficiary first. We also want to make sure that we have identification visible for everyone to see. Now, during the warmer weather, of course, it's easy to have it on your shirt, visible for all to see. In the wintertime, you still want to make sure that you've got that on the outside of your jacket, so as you arrive, everyone knows who you are and what company you're with. Now, over here on the right-hand side, we've got an example of Stephanie Harrison. This is our badge that we've made for her. Now, at the top, you'll see her company name. That's MTM, but of course, on your badge, that will be your company name. And then below her picture, we've got her name, again, very clearly written for everyone to see exactly who she is and what company she's with. Now, you want to make sure that you identify yourself as you go to pick the member up if there's not a clear and present entrance at the pickup location. You also want to keep in mind, after the scheduled pickup time, you may wait 5 minutes. So we'll review the scheduled pickup time and exactly what that is a little bit later on in our course, but keep in mind, once you've arrived, if the member isn't ready yet, you've got 5 minutes at least to wait after that scheduled pickup time. Now, moving on to assistance. Of course, we do want to assist the individuals, the beneficiaries, as they enter and exit the vehicle. That does include opening and closing doors if needed, or providing extra assistance as the beneficiary comes from the pickup location or point to the vehicle. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you are providing assistance. Of course, before you ever touch a member, you always want to ask permission first. Then you want to ask how or where you may assist them. Now, we wouldn't want to just grab the beneficiary's arm to try to assist or help them up into the vehicle without knowing first what, is there a reason why maybe we couldn't? Perhaps the member is going in for a follow-up from a surgery on his or her shoulder. So again, we wouldn't want to just grab the beneficiary without asking permission first, and then asking how or where we may assist that individual. Now, we've listed a few scenarios here that it would be deemed appropriate or necessary that you could touch or assist the member. That includes assistance into and out of the vehicle, helping the beneficiary into a seat, securing seatbelts or restraints, and rendering first aid. Now, I'm sure everyone already has their vehicle at a comfortable temperature, but definitely keep in mind, if it's hot outside, you want to get that air conditioning on to make sure that that is a comfortable temperature for the beneficiary as they're being transported. Regarding safety, a few things here. Of course, we never use a cell phone while we're driving unless we've got a hands-free or Bluetooth type device. Hope it's a given that we should never ever text while driving. And we also shouldn't wear any sort of headphones while on duty either. All right. Well, as we're assisting individuals or beneficiaries, a couple things to keep in mind. We want to make sure that we are bringing our communication skills in as they board or disembark the vehicle. This specifically applies to the case of wheelchairs and lifts and ramps. So put yourselves in the beneficiary's position here for a moment. You're in a wheelchair or mobility device and you're on the lift, and that lift starts to move up if you're getting into the vehicle, or starts to lower as you're coming out of the vehicle. Of course, if you've got a driver or an attendant who is giving you a step-by-step, here's what's going to happen next. Now we're going to go ahead and lower the lift. That will definitely help set you at ease a little bit and make sure that you have a more enjoyable experience. So again, bring those communication skills in and make sure that you let the beneficiary know exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Now, regarding child safety seats or car seats, you as the driver or attendant is responsible for securing that car seat or child safety seat within the vehicle itself. Mom, dad, or guardian, they're responsible for making sure that that child is then restrained and seat belted properly within that seat. Now, of course, prior to putting that vehicle in drive and heading off on your transport, you want to make sure that everyone is properly restrained, secured, seat belted, and everybody is ready to go first. Now, as the beneficiary is exiting the vehicle, again, we want to make sure that we are offering that assistance. And as we said before, you want to always ask permission before you touch the member, and then ask how or where you may assist. Keep in mind, though, that that may include assisting the individual to the access point or the entrance of the destination. Couple things to note regarding wheelchair securement. The first one is that we cannot deny service on the difficulty of securing that wheelchair or mobility device within the vehicle. And standees, and that's an ADA term, standees is someone who is not in a wheelchair or mobility device. So, perhaps they're just walking up to the vehicle, or perhaps, maybe they've got a walker or cane. But it says we must permit standees to use the lift. So let's say we're going to go pick up Mrs. Smith today, and although Mrs. Smith does not have a wheelchair or mobility device, let's say that she's got a walker with her today. Now she sees that as we pull up in the vehicle that we've got a wheelchair accessible van, we've got that lift, and she requests to use that lift to get into the vehicle as opposed to stepping up. Now, she's a standee and she's requested to use the lift. We must go ahead, lower that lift, and allow her to gain access to the vehicle by the lift. We cannot deny or tell her that she has to step up. All mobility devices and wheelchairs must fit within that envelope of securement on that lift or ramp, and you as a vehicle operator should be the only one who is in control of that lift or ramp. Mom, dad, guardian, they may have great intentions. They may want to be very helpful and try to assist. However, because they have not been trained on the safety or the operation of that lift or ramp, they should not be in control of it whatsoever. As a reminder, all wheelchairs and mobility devices must be secured using that 4-point floor securement system, and each of those locations must have their own 3-point passenger restraint system, which must be used. You'll see that 3-point passenger restraint system illustrated over on the right-hand side here. Also, as a reminder, all lifts and ramps must have regular maintenance programs in place. It's your duty as a driver or attendant to report to your company any non-operating lifts or ramps just as quickly as possible. It is your company's responsibility to make every effort to have that lift or ramp repaired before that vehicle's next day of service. Now, from time to time, we may have what we refer to as a transfer, and that's someone who comes out to the vehicle in a wheelchair or mobility device, but chooses to transfer to the vehicle seat for the transport itself. Now, this is something that we can recommend, but we can never require. And if you do have an individual who transfers to the vehicle seat for the transport itself, you want to go ahead, offer that assistance, and then store that wheelchair and secure it in the back of your vehicle. Now, as I was saying, we want to store and secure. So, a couple things here. Regarding securement and storage of mobility aids and folding wheelchairs. Let's go back to our example with Mrs. Smith for just a moment. She's gained access to the vehicle today by that lift. She's in the vehicle seat. She's got her seatbelt on. She's ready to go. But you'll also remember we said that she had a walker with her today. We want to store and secure that walker in the back of the vehicle. Now, the reason why I say store and secure and not just place it in the back of the vehicle, because as we're now traveling down the road today, let's say a vehicle in front of us stops suddenly. Of course, you're going to have to stop suddenly so we can avoid a fender bender or a collision. That walker could fly forward. It could hit Mrs. Smith. It could hit you. It could hit another beneficiary. And of course, we wouldn't want that to happen. We wouldn't want it to hit anyone at all. So again, we store and secure it so it doesn't become a projectile during transport. Also keep in mind that you are not responsible for any of the beneficiary's personal items. Moving on to sensitivity, we'll begin with safety. And again, we want to make sure prior to the departure, so before your vehicle leaves the premises, after you've dropped off the beneficiary, make sure that member or that beneficiary is safely inside that destination. So whether you've dropped them off at a home or a hospital, wherever you've dropped them off, before you leave, make sure that member's all the way inside. Next, you want to make sure that you provide an appropriate level of assistance to a beneficiary when requested or when necessitated by the beneficiary's mobility status or personal condition, including curb-to-curb, door-to-door, and hand-to-hand assistance. You also want to prevent the beneficiary from crossing streets to reach the entrance of their destination. So as you pull up to the facility or hospital, again, you want to make sure that you're dropping that individual off in a safe location. Now, there should be a no food or beverage sign visible for all to see in the vehicle. This applies not just to the driver and attendants, but also to the beneficiaries or passengers as well. There should also be a no smoking sign visible for all to see. And again, this not just applies to you as the driver or attendant, but also to the beneficiary and their passengers as well. Now, conduct, drugs and alcohol. No driver or attendant shall use or be under the influence of alcohol, narcotics and illegal drugs, or drugs that impair one's ability to perform while on duty. Moving on to emergency situations. Now, should an accident or incident occur, it's quite natural that the beneficiaries will look to you as a leadership type role. Because of that, the first thing you want to do is remain calm. You want to do what you can to protect yourself, the passengers, and of course the vehicle, if possible, and this does include preventing any injury or death to anyone involved in the situation at all. You want to determine what has happened and are there any actions or inactions that you could take or not take that will, again, assist in the safety of you, the people, and the property. If possible, you want to reduce vehicle and property damage, and of course you always want to avoid any unnecessary liability claims. You want to report these incidents and accidents. Of course, ideally, that would be immediately. However, you definitely want to do it just as quickly as it's safe to do so. Now, you want to follow your company's policies and procedures, and that means, if that's notifying your dispatch or supervisor of these situations, and then they report that verbally to MTM immediately or as quickly as possible, that's fine. You definitely want to then document the situation. You want to contact your emergency services as needed or as necessary, keeping in mind that this may not necessarily be for medical emergency services. Also keep in mind that those police reports can definitely provide documentation for you and follow your company's policies. Now, If those emergency services were called, of course you want to make sure that you do file that police report. You want to document the situation in as much detail as possible, and that does include using MTM's accident and incident form. Now, on the screen what you'll see here, this is an example of MTM's accident and incident form. Couple things to keep in mind. I realize this is quite small. I don't expect you to be able to read it. However, I want to illustrate a couple things here. The first one is that we are asking for quite a bit of detail. I also want to point out that it's very important that you not just fill this out and get it over to MTM, but you get it to MTM by the end of the next business day. Moving on to accurate record keeping. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background as far as what happens when a beneficiary calls in to request transportation services. The first thing we'll do is we'll verify that this individual is eligible for these transportation services. Next, we'll confirm that the location or the address that they're requesting transportation to does provide a covered service. Now, after we've verified and confirmed, we'll go ahead and set the trip up within our system. Our system will automatically assign what we call a trip number, or think of it as an authorization or prior authorization number. Now, the majority of the trips that you'll see from MTM are what we refer to as round trips. These are most commonly seen as member's house to doctor's appointment, back to member's house. So we basically have two addresses, they're just in reverse order. Now, you'll see we've got a couple examples of trip numbers here. They'll start off with 4 letters, followed by several numbers, and then an A or a B. Now, the A, that tells us that this is the 2-leg, or member's house to the doctor's appointment. That's the 2-leg of the trip. Now, to let you know that the second leg is tied to the first leg, and it is the from leg. So we've got from the doctor's office back to the member's house. We let you know that by a B. You'll see that it's the exact same trip number itself, however, it's got a B on the end. So again, the B represents the from leg of the trip. All right. Now, on the screen, what you'll see here, this is an example of a trip sheet. Now, this is one of the ways that we provide the information of trips for you. We'll go over exactly where the information is located on this sheet. That way, if you ever use it, there's multiple ways, but if your company prefers this way, I want to make sure you do know how to read this. Now, this top section here, this is where you'll see the confidentiality statement. Now, the reason the confidentiality statement is here is because this trip sheet does contain what is referred to as PHI, or protected health information. So in order to remain HIPAA compliant, we must keep this information confidential. That includes not letting anyone else see it and keeping it under lock and key when we're not actively with it. Now, this next section that you'll see here, this is where we'll find the member information. So we've got first name, last name, phone number, that type of information. Below that, you'll see this is the trip-specific information. So in the upper left-hand corner, we've got the trip number. We'll see that this one is a B leg, or the from leg of the trip. That's followed by the appointment date, time, distance. We also have the return time. Now, under that, you'll see that we've got the pickup and drop-off addresses, and that does include a phone number for each. Below that, in the same section, you'll see that this is where we'll list any specific or special information that you may need to know regarding this trip. Now, that does include if the member uses crutches, walker, or cane, we would notify you of that here. But it may also include if this trip is what we refer to as an RTP, or a recurring trip. So if the member attends dialysis, let's say Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9 a.m., we would list RTP Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9 a.m. Now, below that is where we would fill out the pickup and drop-off or PUDO information, as well as obtain signatures. And we'll actually get into that information in just a moment as we review our trip log. Now, the reason why these trip logs are so important and so critical, that is because they are tied directly to the claims or the payment of a trip. So it's very important that we fill out these trip logs in their entirety. We wouldn't want to skip over a section or anything. We want to make sure so we can avoid any appeals or any difficulties in billing, that we fill everything out before we turn it in. Now, we do have few items here that are listed as critical items, but again, we want to make sure that we fill it out in its entirety. They include trip numbers, driver's license numbers, VIN numbers, pickup and drop off or PUDO times, and signatures and odometer readings. All right, now on the screen what you'll see here, this is an example of our trip log. You'll see up in the upper left-hand corner, we have a place for your company name. That's followed by the date of service, the driver's license number, and the last 5 digits of the VIN for the vehicle that was used for the transport. Now, in this grid section down here, this is where we will fill out the trip-specific information. We'll start over on the left-hand side. We'll list the trip number. Keep in mind that if you've got a round trip, you want to put the A leg on one line and a B leg on the other line. We don't want to try to squeeze 2 trip numbers onto one line. That's followed by the beneficiary's name, and that's followed by the pickup and drop-off times, or PUDO times. Now, a couple things I want to point out regarding the PUDO times. There are 4 times required for each leg of the trip. It's also a requirement that as you fill out these times for each leg of the trip, they are filled out in military time format. So if it's a 1 p.m. scheduled pickup time, instead of writing 1 p.m., you'll write 1300. Now, as I was saying, there are 4 times for each leg of the trip. The first time is the scheduled pickup time, and you'll remember that we referred to this time earlier in the course. The scheduled pickup time is the time that you or your company has determined would be an adequate amount of time to pick the member or beneficiary up, transport them safely and on time to their appointment. Now, the scheduled pickup time should also be communicated to the beneficiary the day before the appointment. That way they'll be ready for you as you arrive. The second time is the pickup arrival time. That is what time you've arrived to pick up the member. So depending on weather or traffic, you may be a minute or 2 before that scheduled pickup time, or you may be a minute after that scheduled pickup time. But again, that will be your pickup arrival time. Now, the third time required for each leg of the trip is the pickup departure time. Now, it is possible that the pickup arrival and pickup departure time will be the exact same time. However, it's more than likely that you'll arrive, there'll be a few minutes between the two for the member or the beneficiary to come out to the vehicle, get into the vehicle, fasten seatbelts, and are ready to go. The fourth and final time required for each leg of the trip is the drop-off time, and that is what time you've arrived at that destination location and dropped the beneficiary off. So again, 4 times for each leg of the trip, 4 PUDO or pickup and drop-off times for each leg of the trip. One thing I want to cover, if we have what we call a will call.
All will calls have to be reported to MTM. Will calls cannot be reported to transportation providers directly. They must be reported to MTM.
Doctors' offices or facilities. So what she's told us, she doesn't know, but it's a will call. You may also see this noted on trip information in military time format as 2359. Now, that doesn't mean that we want you to pick up Mrs. Smith at 11:59 p.m. It simply means that she'll give us a call or give you a call when she's ready for that pickup to go home.
And again, please remember, members need and beneficiaries need to call MTM for all will calls. They must not call transportation providers directly.
Is what time Mrs. Smith called to request the trip home. So if she called at 3 p.m., 1500 will be your scheduled pickup time, and the remaining 3 times will be just as we described before. Now the next 2 columns you'll see here, this is for your odometer readings. You'll have 2 odometer readings for each leg of the trip. You'll have the pickup odometer reading, and that is what your odometer says as you arrive and you're ready to pick up the member or beneficiary. Then you'll have the drop-off odometer reading, and that is what your odometer says as you drop the beneficiary off at their destination location. Now, the final column is for the beneficiary's signature. Couple things I want to note here. It must be a signature. We cannot accept initials. If the beneficiary writes their initials, just kindly ask for them to sign his or her full name. Now, let's say we're transporting a child today, and the child isn't old enough to sign his or her name yet. The beneficiary's mom, dad, or guardian may sign on his or her behalf. Keep in mind, they should sign his or her name, not the child or beneficiary's name. The adult should sign the adult's name. Final scenario here under the beneficiary signature, and that is what if the individual is being dropped off, is unable to sign, and lives by themselves. So perhaps we've got an individual who is coming home from dialysis. They've got that fistula or their graft in the arm. They're feeling some side effects from the dialysis. They're weak. They're okay to be left at home alone. However, they're just unable to sign today. In that rare scenario, you can write this acronym. The acronym is PUTS. That is PUTS, and it stands for Passenger Unable to Sign. Again, that's P as in Paul, U as in umbrella, T as in Tom, S as in Sam. PUTS, Passenger Unable to Sign. That lets our signature verification staff know that as we are reviewing these trip logs, that although the member or the beneficiary was indeed transported, unfortunately, he or she was unable to sign that day. Now, as you recall, I really stressed before that we want to make sure that we fill out this trip log in its entirety. So we're not quite done yet. The last thing we ask that you do, you go ahead and sign and print your name down here. Now, the reason why we ask you to sign and print your name is because we ask that as you do this, that you certify that all the information that you are presenting up above is accurate, true, and correct. Couple things to keep in mind. At minimum, the log should show notes in the case of cancellations, incomplete requests, or no-shows. So let's say we're going to go pick up a beneficiary today, and he or she is either not at the pickup location, or he or she cancels at the time of pickup. You still want to write the trip number, write the beneficiary's name, the scheduled pickup time, the pickup arrival time, the pickup departure time, and instead of a drop-off time, you'll write NS. That represents no-show. All right, moving on to drug and alcohol policy. All drivers and attendants must submit a signed acknowledgement and receipt and understanding of their company's substance-free workplace policy. Drug screening and results must be included. MTM does maintain these drug results and screenings on hand. Keep in mind that Again, we must all pass an initial drug and alcohol test. These tests must be performed by a third-party administrator. We cannot accept any sort of do-it-yourself-at-home type kits. We must also recognize that we must submit to random and post-accident drug and alcohol screenings. Now, I want to expand on the post-accident drug and alcohol screening just a little bit here. After an accident has occurred or incident, keep in mind that even if it wasn't your fault, perhaps an individual in a vehicle behind you very lightly bumped into yours, it's still an accident. There was a police report filed, everybody's okay, thank goodness. Even though it wasn't your fault, it is standard policy that a post-accident drug and alcohol screening will be required. Now, we do have contacts for you. We have an MTM contract representative. This individual will be in touch with the company, including the results of these screenings and tests. A couple things to keep in mind. If the driver or attendant is found to be in violation of that substance-free workplace policy, remember, a refusal is also considered a violation. Suspension and termination from providing MTM services will be the result. Keep in mind, MTM also issues corrective active measures for transportation providers should we see any violations. Now, that does conclude our course today. Thank you so much for your participation. The next step you'll need to do is take the quiz. We'll grade it, get that certificate created for you. Have a great day. Thank you.